Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Welcome to our Tech Talk today. We have Andrew Phelps and Elizabeth Lawley here from Rochester Institute of Technology. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to introduce them to you, those of you who don't know them already. They've been longtime partners of Microsoft doing all kinds of incredible stuff. Most recently helping us with a project in what we're calling gameful research. And this is, some of you might be familiar with gamification and pointification and gameful things and all things Jane McGonigal, and I'll let them talk more about it than us. But I just want to point out that Microsoft has been engaged in this area for a very, very, very long time. We've had the Games for Learning Institute for 3 years now, and our productivity games that are used on by our employee population to make the everyday activities we do more fun have been going on for many years now. There's people like Ross Smith, who's going to be at the Gamification Summit talking on this next week, who are just absolutely legendary and visionary individuals. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce you to two very legendary and visionary individuals that I have the pleasure to work with. So yeah, I'll just give it to you guys. Cheers.
All right. Okay, so I'm not standing behind the podium because I will disappear.
Sure,
so,
sounds good.
Okay. All right, so we haven't given this talk before. You guys are our guinea pigs on this, and you get to afterwards tell us all the things that we should change about it. But I don't know. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
You can start.
Okay, so we'll go back. All right, so just press play. This is the project we're working on. The idea behind this came out of a colleague of ours who's working on this project as well, who was talking with some students who basically said, we ought to get achievements for some of the cool stuff that we do around here. The creative things that we do, the funny things that we do. And, she said, yeah, we really should. And she talked to our department chair, who said, yeah, we should do something like that. And then he talked to Donald, and Donald said, here's some startup funds to try it. So we went from, wouldn't it be cool, to, oh, yeah, we're going to build it, I guess. And what we've been thinking about over the past couple of months is, how do you do this in a way that doesn't break the educational environment? Because there's a lot of risk when you start saying, we'll give you points for things, we'll give you rewards for things. If you've read any of the recent research on motivation and rewards and things like that, you can actually do a lot of harm by offering extrinsic rewards for things that have intrinsic motivating value, and we want to be really careful on all of that. So we've called the project Just Press Play. This green button is going to be a recurring motif as we go through this that you'll start to see. And I know Jane was out here, I don't know, about 2 weeks ago, talking about her book, and a lot of what she talks about here in Reality Being Broken is what we're starting to think about in terms of our much smaller piece of reality, right? We're not trying to fix all of reality, but we are trying to make the educational experience a little less broken. We're trying to address some of the problems that we know that our students have. And so that's what we're starting from. When I say our piece is broken, in many ways our piece is really good. We have a very, very strong program. We've got a new school of interactive games and media. We've got 750 students in it. We are admitting about 250 a year right now, 180, 190 of which are in the game design and development program, 60 of whom are in the interactive media program. And we have great placement. But like everybody, we struggle with retention issues. It's still hard to attract the widest range, the most diverse range of students. And one of the things that we were looking at recently is that a recent study shows that college freshmen rate their emotional health extremely poorly. Right? They are under enormous amounts of stress. My mother, who teaches in the same university I do, was telling me that she's got a student who's an Afghan war veteran. And he told her that college has been more stressful for him than being at war. in part because of the open-endedness of it. And this is a big piece of it, right? Somebody's not, when you're used to being told what to do, and suddenly it switches to you have to use your own judgment. You have to use critical thinking. That can be emotionally, psychologically very stressful. So these are some things that we've been thinking about.
Yeah, so just to sort of chime in, first I love this picture because the I'm not getting it and I'm not going to get it desperation is so ultimately clear, right, on this person's face. And I came to this project with stats like this, all right? A couple of years ago, I gave up my life to become an educational administrator, which everyone will tell you is the death knell of your entire career, and you will never think another original thought ever. And along the way, you get access to the treasure trove of all of the data of the university, right? There is literally nothing that you can't pick up the phone and take a look at, and you start to see the rich environment that surrounds a modern technological campus and the ways that people touch it and the ways that we understand all of the ways that people touch it, but we don't really do anything with it at all, other than track it and after the fact go, a lot of people failed there, we should fix that at some point, right? I mean, these are really great retention numbers. I can go to educational conferences and talk about these numbers and people are, hugely excited by what are we doing right? That we're not losing half of the incoming class, okay? I still consider this to be a really big problem, all right? That many people are disconnected from first-year curricula. Because on paper, they're all capable of doing it, right? One of the neat things about having a highly successful program is there's this weird compression effect where you get, tons and tons of really, on paper, very bright people that were in the top of their class in their high school and all this other kind of stuff, but a lot of them don't make it. So what's going on there?
That was taken at Imagine Cup, by the way. That taken about 4 o'clock in the morning as one of the teams was deep in thought to accomplish something. Ian?
Do you want to save questions at the end, or do you want, like...
You know me. You can ask questions.
Well, I'm just curious. Do you guys have a grasp on what's the number that is just basically people that... there's going to be this number of students, right, that jump into a program and they decide it's not for them. Like, they're not leaving because they're failing necessarily, but they just want to change. Like, so is there going to be, like, always 2-3% that you're never... Like, what's... what I'm saying? Like, what's the number? Or is this excluding that, too?
This is more... there are some percentage of that 11% that, have transitioned to other programs, some of which by choice. You come in and you think this is what you wanted, but it turns out you really wanted to be an art major or, whatever it is, right? And okay, great. But these are people that are being forced to transition in the freshman year before you really have necessarily a very good sense of that. I mean, there are some students that do that, but I think in actuality, for somebody to know that in the first 10 weeks is somewhat rare. So this speaks more to, coming in and all of a sudden not being able to hit the metric.
So one of the goals here is to start to think, there are two what we're calling holistic goals. One is we want to start thinking more about the student as not just a body in the class, not just a GPA, but the richer set of things that they participate in and engage in. Right now we really don't have a good view of the student, right? We have a view of their transcript, but the transcript is not necessarily a full representation of the things that somebody accomplishes and learns over the period of their undergraduate education. But similarly, we want them to have a more holistic view of what becoming a professional in their field really means, which is not just I took this class and I took this class, but it's developing a set of interrelated skills. Okay? And we have these amazing students, but they don't always know how amazing they are. They don't always know how amazing each other are. And they don't always have a good way to really express that. So, whoop.
And one of the things that goes on with that, we spent some time looking, so obviously the game design thing is a big driver and a big motivator for people coming into our program. They're familiar with this kind of media, and they come in and they say, I really want to do this. But what they're coming in being essentially, very deep consumers of media, but that has very little to do actually with being a developer of media. And there was this really comical but well done piece out of Escapist magazine a little while ago about, you want to be a game designer. What does that mean? And, so they sort of go through, all of the things that are involved in being a game designer, but one of the salient points at the very end of that was that the best designers are those that can draw from a very rich and well-rounded life. Right? And that is antithetical to the viewpoint of a lot of incoming students, because they have been drilled in the fact that their view of education is that they will have their head open up, knowledge poured into it of how to perform a specific task or tasks, right? And then they go on their merry way and actually do what they have been taught to do, right? And we know that in any design field that doesn't quite work out that way.
Now, we also know that they do a really bad job, especially to begin with, of realizing how important it is for them to connect with the other people in the program. They complain bitterly about every group project they're ever given, because group projects are hard, and you need to coordinate with people, and other people don't always do what they're supposed to do. And we tell them over and over again, this is going to be very much what you have to deal with for the rest of your life. Nobody goes out and builds software or builds websites or builds games by themselves, really. This is done as collaborative work, and helping them learn how to collaborate more effectively is a big part of what we're trying to do in all of this. But what we've started to do, really, is to think about the narrative of the undergraduate student experience, right? That there's an underlying story of what happens when you get to school, the mileposts along the way, the kinds of things that happen. We don't actually have a sign hanging from the lab right now that says speed bumps next 96 months, but that's the concept that we're trying to get to here, is that this is not a smooth path. This is a rocky road along the way, and there's some key things that we've identified, what we're calling choke points along the way. There's obviously the point where the student arrives on campus and is dealing with the unfamiliarity of the new experience. How do I meet people? How do I know what I'm supposed to do? There's also a really important point at the end of the freshman year, because freshman year curriculum is very much about, we will tell you what you're supposed to do. You're taking introductory programming. You're taking very basic survey classes. You're being given very clear assignments. But by the time you get to sophomore year, things start to become more open-ended. You have to take more agency in the process. We'll say, I'll tell my sophomores, I want you to build a website about a place that you've lived. They'll be like, well, what do you mean? Do you mean like the house, or do you mean like the city? And I'll say, yes, pick something about where you've lived. But this is scary for them. This is stressful, this idea of open-ended stuff where someone's not telling you exactly what to do and exactly how to do it. And then even more importantly for people in creative fields, between approximately their junior and senior year, we go from saying we want you to make stuff to we want you to understand the difference between okay stuff and good stuff, or bad stuff and okay stuff. How do you develop a critical eye? Not just making stuff, but really understanding how to critique your own work and how to critique other people's work, which is often missing in professional, technical programs. You see more of this in art programs where there's built-in critique functions, but in terms of making sure that you're putting your stuff out there for other people to see, learning how to get feedback on it, this is really important. But trying to put all of this into classes doesn't always work. Okay? Classes are a very structured, very top-down, somebody is judging you, not very playful environment. Right? GPAs are scary, grades are scary, all that is, all that evaluative stuff. So what we've been thinking about is how do we add what, Jane talks about as a game layer, on top of the reality of their educational experience. How do we get them to engage in some of the kinds of activities that we know will help them with these choke points along the way, but to do it in a way that they don't have to. One of the key things about something being a game is it's voluntary. You opt in. If your professor says you have to do this, it's not a game anymore. It's your responsibility to accomplish it. So we're thinking about, how do we do this in a way that infuses it with the sense of playfulness and gaming. And one of the ways we're doing this is, I said we're thinking about the underlying narrative. In many ways, you can think about that underlying narrative of the undergraduate experience as being, the hero's journey. Right? The hero sets out on the journey with a vague sense of what they're trying to accomplish and no real sense of what the monsters and, dangerous things that they will meet along the way are. And often not a sense of how these challenges are going to help prepare them for the longer term success at the end. So if we think about our students as on this journey, how do we get them to understand and engage with the small monsters along the way so that they can defeat the big monsters at the very end? And if we think about it, as in levels of a game, all of these little challenges should really prepare you for the big ones. How can we build in little challenges so that when you get to that point where you have to take on more personal responsibility or where you have to develop better critical skills, how do you know how to do that? How have you prepared people through things that they enjoy doing?
Yeah, and when I was thinking about this analogy, a couple of different points came up about heroes' journeys in general and comparing them to the undergraduate narrative, which is, one is, usually when we study that narrative, we think of it as being transformative, which as educators is exactly what we want, right? Okay, people start out with, get gold from dragon, right? And then break that into sub-pieces and so on and so forth. But you don't know what the sub-pieces are in order to get gold from dragon. You just sort of head that direction with a vague plan and a couple of dwarves. And so there's this notion of you have to fill in the pieces along the way, right? There's also this notion of mentorship or guides, right? Or that the knowledge there is knowledge enough in the world, if you are capable of finding it, to help you and to enable you to succeed in that goal, okay? Which is what we all sort of want out of our campus environments and so on and so forth. But then I got to thinking that this also really leads into something that I've seen time and time again with individual students, and particularly the students that you start to see once you become a chair, because you see every problem case once you become a chair, which is the quest length. The length of that quest vastly exceeds the localized sphere of attention at any point in time, right? And so you set off west and say, get gold from dragon, but then you're slogging through the, Mirkwood, and you're not even thinking about the dragon, right? You're just thinking, get to other side of forest, right? And at a certain point, you start to make decisions that are based solely on the localized sphere and not your overall. Or you don't understand the relationship that one of these things had along the way relative to the overall goal. That got us sort of thinking about, well, how do we track progress on a relative to overall goal? And we started, Weeze actually brought up the notion of going on a long car trip, right? So there are some individuals that when you go on a long car trip, they will count the mileposts, right? It's a very concrete measure, right? You are now 1 mile closer. You are now another mile closer. There is no argument, right? Except when you believe the Department of Transportation has placed them incorrectly. So, but then other folks will count telephone poles. Do you know how many telephone poles are between you and Florida? Right? But it's still a marker of progress, right? My family played the game where we would count hawks. And just, if you can see it circling from the road, one hawk, which is one more than you have, right? And that was a way to entertain, but it was also a way to mark progress and so on and so forth. And so there's different measures of progress that mean different things. So sometimes we want to measure things along, this very abstract notion of completionism, right? X out of Y, right? Those types of metrics, right? I've completed 3 courses of my 15 or whatever, it is in the curriculum. But sometimes we want to measure things based more on an axis of localized importance and meaning, all right? And the way we track college curriculum in the large is set up entirely on abstract measures of completionism, but not necessarily on localized meaning. If you ask any faculty, right, they have a lot to say about the localized meaning and importance of any particular course and how it relates to the curriculum and all that kind of stuff. But when you look at where that's codified, is this course more important than that course, and so on and so forth? Not so much in the record of things, and not so much in a new person's understanding of what might or might not be important.
So So that's the why we're doing it, right? This is the underlying narrative, some of the underlying motivations. Next is sort of how we're going to do this. And one of the things that we really want to do is make this game as embedded and pervasive in our students' environments as we possibly can. And this means not just the online environment or the computer environment, but also the physical environment. So, we chose an icon, a logo for this that invites interaction. Right? I showed the design document for this to my 14-year-old a couple of weeks ago, and it was a Word document, and at the top it had that green button logo on it, and he immediately clicked on the logo, and he said nothing happened. And I thought, that's awesome, because already it's inviting engagement, right? And I then went to our website developer and said, we need to fix the website so that when you click the button, something happens, because I'm not getting burned on that one again by my own kid. But we want this button to show up in lots of interesting, unexpected places, right? We want it on the walls. We want it in the labs. We want it on websites that they encounter as they're walking around. And one of the things we're starting to think about too is actually having ways to activate the physical space. So one of the scenarios we've talked about is that freshmen in their orientation will get a bracelet with no explanation whatsoever, just a little tag with a URL on it. This is an RFID-enabled bracelet. And when they walk past certain places on campus, something will happen. This is a magical bracelet. This activates the spaces around you. Okay? So these are some of the things that we want to try to have happen. So you walk into the lab, and suddenly the just press play button on the wall glows, and it flashes a code. And you got to figure out what to do with the code. We want to pull them in. We don't want to push them into this game. We don't want to require this game. We're not going to include it in classes. We're not going to say this is something you have to do. We want them to fall into it and be delighted, to be engaged, to find it playful. Right. We want it to be accessible to them everywhere. So it will show up in browsers. It will be available on phones. That we will have mobile games that tie into this. We will have. We've already got buy-in from our university to embed content in a variety of existing websites. So you go to the library website and you log into one of the research databases, and there's a button. And if you click the button, maybe you get, a quest to find a particular set of research things that gives you a special scholar achievement along the way. So, as much as we can, we want to have there be delightful surprises. That glowing green button, no matter where you see it, says, if you press me, something fun will happen. This is Alice and the drink me along the way. So we're also starting to think about, what the nature of these achievements might be, the way that we can frame them. This slide is actually kind of out of order because this is part of how we're going to pull them into this. We're planning a whole campaign over the summer that will involve mysterious postcards that show up in students' real-world mailboxes, posts that show up on their Facebook wall, from the game or from somebody who's playing the game that they didn't know actually existed, some videos that we plan on doing to engage people in the process. So we want them to show up on campus, particularly our existing students, already excited about this. And then the freshmen, we want to try to embed this as much as possible in ways that they will run into. And we've been thinking too about pulling them in is one thing, keeping them in is another. So what kinds of ways can we make sure that they know there's interesting stuff out there? What are their friends doing? What are the achievements that a lot of people are coming up with right now? These are, we have not actually created any of these yet, but yes, some of them are quite delightful. Some of them will be very much about exploring the local environment, about going out and trying local restaurants, about, checking out recreational reading material. Some of them will be about creative work that they do. But a lot of it, we want to build on what we know about reputation systems, what we know about social networks, what we know about people's interest in comparing themselves to others and knowing what other people are doing. As I mentioned before, Some of this will actually get embedded into site. So it might be that you go to the RIT library site and something pops up to say, there's an achievement here. If you go do this thing, in the physical library, you could get some points for having that happen. Did you want to add something there?
Yeah, just, when you're looking through a lot of these sample achievements and a lot of the ways that we're talking about sort of gamifying portions of the campus environment, these are all the very same things that you hear from most any academic affairs unit, right? Of here's what we know about students that succeed in the collegiate environment, right? We know that they become engaged in their localized community. We know that they become, aware of the campus. We know that they, are able to draw upon the resources of the campus. All of these things. We know an awful lot educationally about what are good indicators of success and what behaviors will result in typically, sort of more success around those gates. But this is a way to actually, speak to the motivation of those issues, right? And one of the things that we found is, like we had the big friend wheel a few slides ago, right? So almost every campus right now is engaged in a process of saying, how do we simplify the campus environment from the student perspective, right? I see it over and over and over again. People are saying, how do we make, a one-stop shop for academic advising? How do we, reduce the number of entry points for somebody into this system so that they have, easier times making decisions and so on and so forth? And yet, they're so totally capable of managing complexity, right, by the time they arrive to us. They can manage a friends network of a gazillion people, right, on multiple networks and, all the rest. But somehow they can't find the library? Like, I just don't think that's true. It's what was the motivation, right? Did they understand that finding the library was going to be a resource that was critical in their path to success?
A lot of what we're thinking about, too, is what we can draw from what we know about existing achievement systems. So, you can compare your achievements, in Xbox Live to what other people are doing. Apparently, Kevin doesn't play Dance Central at this point, so I'm going to have to figure out what's going on with that. But many systems will allow you to do this. If you play World of Warcraft, you can compare achievements of what you did versus any passing player in the game. We want them to be able to compare themselves to other players. We also want our faculty playing this as well, and one of the great advantages of piloting this in a game design and development program is if you're going to find any faculty willing to participate in something like this, it's going to be us, right? We like to play games. This is why we teach in a game design and development program. But one interesting thing that happens with this is it's not just about competition. It's not just, do I have more points than somebody else? Well, that can be part of it. It's also, who am I like? Right? What kind of a player are you? What does your profile look like as a player? I mean, if I look at the achievements in World of Warcraft of another player, I know immediately, are they somebody that likes player versus player combat, or are they somebody who likes to explore the world? Because the nature of what their achievements look like are actually very different. And so we've been thinking about, how do you represent this, right? How do you divide up the kinds of achievements? And how do you start to represent visually what the profile of a given user is? And this is all just playing right now. None of this is the actual system, but we've thought about how do you take these different kinds of achievements that we're imagining and create a profile that you can compare, and you can do some interesting things once you've got that ability. You can say, you know what, Professor Phelps is really cool. I want to be like him, What does his achievement profile look like? What kinds of things does he do that makes him into the kind of person that he is? Or you can go the other way and say, who do I look like, right? What does my profile look the most like? Who are the people that maybe, I can look to for help and encouragement? And from a collaboration standpoint, it allows you to find people with different strengths than your own. You need a designer for your group project, and you're really, really good at some of the technical stuff. How can you find somebody whose profile is complementary to your own? So this becomes a kind of interesting credentialing system, but one that's very different from grades. The fact that you got an A in web design doesn't necessarily tell me if what you're really good at is coding or design or coordination on a group project. So can we start to show people what their community looks like and who the people are that they might want to be like, that they are like, that they can collaborate with? And you've added some notes here, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point about, one of the interesting facets of that is who can you learn from, right? Becomes an interesting question in that space, particularly in a space where achievements are public, right? You're basically saying, oh, that person earned this achievement that I am now working on. I can go to that person and they will have knowledge about what it took to do this, right? By virtue of already having earned it, which, most campus environments, right? You go to the TAs, you go to the graders, you go to the faculty members, so on and so forth. And you go to your fellow students in your class when you're trying to work together collaboratively on a project. But one of the things that we were looking at even early on, way back when I was looking at the Muppet system, was how do you engender a community where the freshmen of their own volition can reasonably approach the seniors about learning introductory programming? Clearly every senior learned it, right? But they don't think to use them as a resource, and vice versa. So how do you bring those groups together in a way where there's a little bit more cohesion and connection, right? Could there be achievements for mentorship within the student body, that sort of thing?
So when I came into this project, it was a little bit on its way, and they were super excited about it and super optimistic about it, and this was all going to roll out in the fall. And I took one look at it, and I said, this is going to be really hard. I got to be the yes but person when I came in, and I said, yes, it's really wonderful and it's really exciting and it's potentially transformative, but, and there were a couple of big pieces of this that I started to think about and worry about. One of them is motivation, okay? I said a little bit at the beginning about how one of the challenges with motivate, this is just taken out of, I'm not sure, my creative person picked this image and I'm not sure why. This is something about intrinsic motivation, but because it's in French, it's less meaningful to me than if it were in a language that I actually was fluent in. At any rate, the concept here is that motivation is a big issue when you start talking about trying to add game mechanics into real-world activities, right? We know that rewarding people for activities does not always make it better. In fact, it often makes it worse. The Deci and Ryan work on self-motivation. Daniel Pink has a great book out right now called Drive that talks a lot about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And there's a huge risk if we do this wrong that we, in fact, make our students less creative, less motivated to do the kinds of things that we want them to do. So, I said we need to really take a step back and say, how are we going to make sure that we don't fall into this, what Pink calls motivation 2.0, the carrot and stick kind of thing, that if you're good, you get points, and if you're bad, you get demerits, and as a result, you never want to do anything unless you get the points. That's not where we want to go with this. We want to make them more motivated, not less. So this is a big piece that we're thinking about and trying to really allow students to feel some sense of autonomy and creativity in this. One of the things we plan to do is to engage students as much as possible, not just in the early design of this, but in the ongoing creation of content. A couple of years ago, Justin Hall did a game called Passively Multiplayer Online Gaming, which was a browser plugin that allowed you to sort of leave landmines and treats on web pages for your friends to get points every time you went to a new website. But more importantly and interesting, and the thing that I got excited about when I saw it, is you could build quests. Okay? And a quest was a series of web pages that you had to go to in series. So you went to the first one, and then a little thing popped up and said, here's the next site you need to go to. And at the end of it, not only would you get points for having completed this quest through the web, but the person who created the quest would get points because somebody had gone through and finished it. And it got me thinking how powerful that would be for my students. With my, in some of my classes, what I ask my students to do is not just review the articles that I've assigned to them, but go out and find something relevant and interesting and give me a review of that. Well, what if they could turn that into a quest? And if they found better stuff, other people would follow it through. So if we can get them involved in being creative as a part of this, that the reward is not just for completing what somebody else told you to do, but for actually contributing and managing the content, that's going to be valuable as well. Here's the yes, but that was the really scary one for me. Some of you may be familiar with this game. Picture the Impossible is a game that I worked with our local newspaper to run back in the fall of 2009. And it was, Sella actually was one of the people who helped to develop content for that game. This was an alternate reality game that we ran over a 2-month period in the fall. And we had 2,000 registered players in the Rochester area, many of whom actually represented families or couples, so we don't know exactly how many players there were, but it was well in excess of 2,000. And I did a talk at GDC last year where I talked about building an ARG on a shoestring budget. And yes, you can do this on a shoestring budget, but it kills you. It is just incredibly hard. And we did it because we were passionate about it, and we loved it, and we wanted it to work. We wanted to prove that it could work, and it was spectacularly successful. It accomplished almost all of the goals that we set out. People became more vested in their community. They explored the area. They learned about local history and culture. It was great. But at the end of it, I said to Andy, I will never do that for free again, ever. And I looked at this and I thought, 750 undergraduate students. That's really close to, the scale of actively involved players. And we've been here before, and this is hard. Scale is hard. Running this with 20 or 30 students, it's fun. Running it with 750, you get big community management issues. You get big issues of having to, keep an eye on things, keep the pulse of it, all of that. So, we're talking about scale that's hard, and we need to make sure that we do this right, because if we do it wrong, we'll do more harm than good in terms of education.
Yeah, and with that, for everyone in the room that actually, ships product, that one of the single most damaging things you can do is ship product that isn't of quality, right? It'll destroy your user base in a way that is, almost tacitly sort of back in your face the next time you try to do anything, because you lose credibility, right? And so one of the key factors in this is whatever we do, we have to do it at a quality level and at a scale level and at a support level and at a management level that we can pull it off, right? Because the worst thing we could possibly do is try something and get, 50% of it to go right, right? Because our students are going to have an expectation. I mean, we're the faculty, right? And if they're involved with it, it's their school and their program. So this is, in the precursor to this that I did over the summer at Faculty Summit, I had this slide that said "big danger everywhere," and that still informs a lot of our thinking about this. This is very hard to do for a lot of these reasons.
And then we're not trying to do this all by ourselves. We're talking with people that we know and we trust, and we're talking with them in the two other areas that for us are sort of the yes but pieces of this. And one of these is the issue of assessment. Yeah. When I came in and looked at this project, I said, this is a great list of achievements. What are you hoping will happen at the end of this? What will be different? And nobody could answer that question. And I said, that's a really important question here. We need to think about what's the difference for our students? How is the experience different? How are the outcomes different? How is being a student in our program different because of this? And that requires, doing real assessment. And we're really good at code. We're less good at assessment. Turns out people in programs of education are really good at assessment of educational environments. So we've been talking with Constance Steinkuehler, who runs the Games Learning and Society Conference every year in Madison and has the GLS group at the Ed School at the University of Wisconsin. They're really excited and enthusiastic about this. And the piece of it that they're really interested in is, in fact, that assessment, which is how do you know it's working? What do you need to ask your students? What do we need to do in terms of talking to this year's freshman class to know how next year's freshman class is different? What are the right questions to ask and what are the right ways to ask those questions? So assessment is a big piece of this. Another piece of this is it turns out there are some legal issues, right? We're asking students to submit creative work that will get evaluated and judged. We're also dealing with a lot of privacy issues. I'm hoping that for some of you, when I said RFID bracelet, you got a little worried, right? And yes, our students will feel the same way. And it's not just that. It's things like we know that they checked out a book from the library. That's scary stuff. Now, the reality is, of course, we know they checked out a book from the university library. The university knows everything that you do with your ID card. But it's one thing for you to know sort of theoretically that the university has all this data. And it's another for you to see that reflected back at you, like, hey, good job going to the gym today, right? That's kind of scary. So, there are issues of how we present that. There are also, significant issues from a legal standpoint of, how do we deal with student records policy? How do we deal with intellectual property issues having to do with this? If somebody uploads their creative work, can we show that to people when we talk about the game? Who has ownership of that? How can we share it? And so we've been talking with Dan Hunter, who runs the State of Play Conference out of New York Law School, who also runs the Institute for Internet Information Policy and Law. And he's very interested in this. And it turns out he's interested in this not just from the standpoint of helping us to clarify what the legal questions are and what the policies are, which is critically important to us. He wants to transform legal education. And he wants to play with the idea of how would you implement this in a professional school environment. Legal and business education are both under a lot of fire right now in terms of whether what they're doing is working and whether it's working well. And we've got some people at Wharton who have also expressed, I haven't told you this yet, Wharton is also interested. So we've definitely got, people who can help us with these problems, but the problems are real, and they're things that we're going to have to address as we move forward on this. And so, part of what we're thinking about too is, if we're successful in doing this at RIT, we'll have a lot of wonderful things to tell people, but there's also some potential for people to say, look, you're a game program. Of course your students and your faculty played the game, because they're pre-programmed to do so. But it wouldn't work, in another kind of school. It wouldn't work in another kind of environment. It wouldn't work with K through 12 students. It wouldn't work with graduate students. It's too frivolous. It's, there are a variety of kinds of criticisms that could come in. So one of the things that we really want to see happen with this as we move forward is we start to think about not just how do we make it work with our students and our students' journey and the specific mileposts and challenges, but also how do you take what we learned from this and apply it in a wide variety of educational environments. And the earlier we do that, I think the better, because if we get too much into the how do we solve the problems at RIT, that's not a replicable thing. We need people involved with this that are thinking about a variety of environments where this can be implemented and where it can be thought about. So what do you want to add?
The only thing I would add is, we've been talking about this project for, almost a year, just in terms of, first our internal discussions and then our, sort of dinner conversations and working forward with, colleagues and friends and all this kind of stuff. And every single educator that we've come in contact with has said, if you can really do it, if we can really learn how to do this, that would be so incredible. At the same time, you know, a lot of folks that we've said, you know, we're going to try this. Everyone assumes that it's already been tried, right? And it really hasn't in the modern day gamification sense. But it seems like it should have been, right? And we do it in little dribs and drabs all over the place, but never together, never collectively, never at the scale where we're talking about let's go out, let's really do it, let's learn some lessons, and let's take those lessons and export them to the broader community in a way that we think can really raise the discourse of what this could be. So we've put together a little site where we're tracking our development and our design thoughts and all of this, and it's out there. You can comment on the site. You can read what we're writing, what we're linking, what we're reading. We'd love for all of you to be involved in what we're thinking and moving it forward. So hopefully there will be lots of other people in short order blasting away at this and helping us move our thinking forward on this. But that's where we are. And come this fall, we hope to be playing a game with a whole bunch of our students.
So, and this site is publicly available. We're working on getting the internal URL caught up. But if you go to thinkplay.rit.edu, it will redirect you to where this site is. One of the things that's on here is a version of our overall vision document for this, which frames the idea, talks about some of these concepts of the hero's journey and how we see this actually playing out, and also addresses some of the the motivation issues and some of the concerns about things like the dangers of gamification. And gamification has become one of these buzzwords that makes me feel a little ill to even utter it, because it does seem to trivialize, right? It's like we'll just we'll toss in some achievements and some points and some badges and poof, it'll be a game. And the criticism of gamification has not been that incorporating game mechanics into things is a bad idea. The criticism has been that incorporating the mechanics without really thinking about the design of the game itself is a bad idea. And that what we're trying to bring to this is really thinking of what is that underlying narrative, what is that experience, what are the things we're trying to accomplish with this overall. But so that's all in the vision document, but one of the things that we're really going to try to do with this as much as possible is really track our thinking about it. So that diagram that I showed you earlier comes out of this Philip Glass composition site where you can look for tracks of his based on joy, sorrow, intensity, and density, right? These really interesting metrics for how you evaluate. And we want to think about what are the characteristics that we want to use as the definition of what our groups of activities and achievements come into. But one of the things that's really nice is that the so many of the people involved in the project have been participating in this, adding stuff. Our graduate students who are working on the technical stuff are also thinking about the game design. And so we would invite you to take a look at this, to comment on things as we go along, to be a part of the dialogue in what we're doing here, because we're really excited about this. We think this has the potential to be genuinely transformative, from an educational standpoint, and we want to do it right. And the more people that give us input and give us feedback and give us thoughts into this, the better we're going to be able to do it. So that's our story.
Yeah, that's it.
So, great. And we have plenty of time for questions.
Yeah.
Jonathan.
So I have a comment and a question. I think this is great. That's very exciting. And to cycle back to your beginning, I think one possible measure of success would be that if you had a 20% attrition rate in your first semester and then 0 after that, because it is, of course, possible that people would really get the idea. You'd be able to identify the people who aren't going to survive in that program. And but that ties to the second question, which is your concluding, or the question, which is your concluding remark about how this might generalize. And the thought that I had there was going back to my now I'm 10 years out of the 18-year-old education, game. And so 18-year-olds have probably evolved quite a bit. But I taught at UC Irvine, and the issue that pops to mind is if I look at the students that I had, there would be a huge breakdown as to how they would respond to this based on gender and cultural background. And so that is, I could see which students would really respond well and which ones would not. Now, it wouldn't matter in your program, but in my program, in information and computer science, it would have mattered because there were big differences based on like their cultural background in particular, and maybe gender also. So I wonder if you've thought about that.
Yeah, and I mean, in that sense, I mean, I think from an emotional and cognitive development, 18-year-olds haven't changed enormously in 10 years. But in terms of an engagement with games and the extent to which games are a part of their day-to-day life, we see the numbers now. And, they're saying, what are the numbers right now? 97% of 18-year-olds right now play some kind of computer or video game on a regular basis that has become so much a part of their day-to-day lives. Whether they see and you look at things like Facebook games and casual games, and if all of this looked like Xbox games, then yeah, there'd be a lot of problems. But some of you may know about the thing that I worked on when I was here with Lily's group a while back, which was a game called Social Genius, which was a casual game that allowed you to see 6 faces from a group that you worked in or a conference you were going to and try to identify who the people were. And you could move up, and as you got further and further afield from your home base, you got more points for identifying people. Something like that is an obvious addition into a game like this. Not all of the activities need to look like traditional gaming stuff, and some of them can absolutely appeal on the sort of casual, mobile, play with your Facebook friends, emphasizing the social rather than just the individual achievements. But that's exactly the concern that I think a lot of people are going to have, which is, yes, it'll work with these students, but will it work with others? And part of the goal in this is going to be to say, we may think it will, but we should check. We should try it in places other than our department, because otherwise it's just our guess, not anything provable. Lily.
I just think it's awesome you guys are doing this. I mean, we have all these ideas about games and kids that we'd be interested in doing, and of course we don't have kids. Oh, we have my own children. They're not going to want to play. So it'd be really fun to partner with you guys or think about other things. We could follow up on that after. It'd be great. And then I was going to kind of riff on the social genius. Jane McGonigal was here giving a talk, and one of the things that she said was at Zappos, the company, they decided they should play a little game. And basically they did social genius, which is you just say who the person is, you see their picture, and they play it for 5 minutes in the morning, particular 5 minutes every day, so games don't become your whole experience. And she said that it's just had profound impact on the Zappos culture, because people will go in and they'll be like, who are you? Because they want to be able to name the person, but it just created this friendly environment. Yeah. And I think especially for freshmen, one of the challenges is just feeling like you're not alone, and kind of overcoming that and creating a friendly feeling. So some of those things would be
when we ran Social Genius for the symposium that one year, I remember people coming in. We ran the game for the Social Computing Symposium and put everything out, and people could play it before they came to the event. And we had people say, I saw this person in the airport, and I knew they were going to the symposium because I'd seen their picture on the, and it was people were playing it for different reasons and in different ways. So some of them were like, I am not going to let Eric have more points than me in this game. So they would go back just to keep an eye on Eric's points so that they had more points than Eric. Other people were playing it just because it was, an interesting, engaging little pastime. But almost everybody who played it said, when I got to the symposium, I recognized and could connect with people that I otherwise wouldn't have known because I recognized their faces. And which is why I've been thinking about adapting this, particularly as a mobile game. We're hoping to hire one of our students to develop a mobile version of it so that people can play it over the summer and start earning points.
Ultimately, too, a lot of these games, like you did this at work for interns here, I think if the games work in schools, they will over time work in lots of other environments.
Yeah.
It's just that if they don't work in schools, they probably aren't going to work in a lot of other environments. Starting at Microsoft is kind of dry. So, unless you have interns. But anyway, so great work. It's great. It's what I do. Ian?
Yeah, just to go on your point, I remember in Tony Hsieh, which is the CEO of Zappos' book Delivering Happiness, he actually said that the employees can't log on their computer unless they answer that question of whose face that is. And you're like, oh, I met that guy last week. I can't even log into your computer. So that's a cool idea. I wish we did that here. But my question was, you guys talked about motivations a lot. And what I'm really interested in is the incentives that motivate people. And one of the coolest books, one of my favorite books that I read was Freakonomics. And I remember there was this great little story in it about behind motivations and incentives about a babysitting service in India, and the fact that everybody was coming late to pick up their kids. They wanted to stop
Israel,
this.
yeah.
Or Israel, yeah. So they started charging people like $10 if they were late an hour, and everybody just said, "Oh, great! So I can now pay $10 and get an extra hour for free." And basically the point was that when they switched it to like $100 an hour, then everybody picked up their kids right away. And so it talked about basically how incentives only work when there's enough of it to make it worth somebody's while. So I'm just curious, like, are we...
The other thing on that is that people picked up their kids more often when there was no reward. I mean, when there was no fee, because there was a social obligation, right? And that's the one that we want to foster,
that's what
right?
I'm trying to figure out,
that
because...
sense of responsibility to each other, to the community, that how do you make things better? I noticed, actually when I was driving to your house last night, they had this sign up, a speed limit sign that I do not remember from the last time I was here, that said, "Please respect our neighborhood. Drive 25 miles an hour." And I slowed down because it was a different, I mean, if it was just, you must do this, I was like, I don't see anybody who's really going to stop me, right?
They do the same thing with construction signs. They say, like, "My daddy works here, please slow down," and then put like a sad face, and it makes...
Yeah, and those for some reason just don't work as well for me, I don't know, maybe I'm broken. But the respect my neighborhood to me was really interesting, and that's the kind of thing that we want to tie into, right? Is that it's not that we're giving you points so much, it's that you're engaging in this, that you're getting to show off your work. One of the things that we're looking at too is allowing people to do sort of upvotes of creative work, and so you could get an achievement for submitting something, but you get something different if the community says, "Oh, that's cool." If any of you have seen SF0, which is a website about sort of community engagement and gameful activities, some of the same kinds of things that you could upvote things and engage people and make it about the social connections rather than just about the points. And this is where the criticism of gamification is coming from too in the games world, which is it's not just about the points. The points alone are not meaningful. I didn't spend hours, visiting every single region in World of Warcraft because I was going to get a 200-point achievement. I did it because I would get a title that the rest of the world would see, right? That I would be able to show off that, that I was Galatea the Explorer. And that's a very different kind of motivation. It's not a numeric motivation, and it wasn't just that I did it for me. I wanted that label to put over my head so the rest of the world would see that, I had accomplished this thing. And so tying into those kinds of motivations, the ones that strengthen the bonds within the community, is going to be really important.
Yeah, I agree with you. My point was just going to be that I see a future issue of this being the same kind of thing that any any game mechanics application these days is trying to solve, which is, something like Foursquare introduces mayorships, which is like having a title. It's something people can aspire to. It's more than just points or badges. But even that, I don't feel like has really, Foursquare is definitely not something that's gone to the masses yet. That's not, my mom's not using Foursquare, for example. It's still a very techie-based thing. And I feel like even Xbox Live with achievements, like, I have a ton of friends who use Xbox Live, and they don't even think about the achievements that much, and it's still not relevant enough. And I'm just curious, like, what's that motivating thing? What's that incentive that's really going to get people to start, paying attention to this if they're not, for example, in a games department or so much into playing a game, but you still want them to be a part of this, right? So I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you go that next step?
That's part of our next several months of game design and testing and iteration, right? So right now we've got a great concept. We've got a lot of talent. We've got a lot of enthusiasm. We have 3 months ahead of us in terms of starting to lay out that underlying game design and motivation framework while we're also building the technology infrastructure. And then the summer is for playtesting, because it's not all going to work. And, the biggest part of this, we didn't build in a lot of playtesting time with Picture the Impossible. The fact that it was as successful as it was is kind of astonishing. But this time we're not making that mistake. And because, in fact, this is higher stakes. And we do need to think about all of that. We are, in fact, working with Foursquare. They are interested in providing us with API access and also with sharing with us some of what they've learned about what motivates people, what engages them. And then down the road, the other thing that's going to be really interesting for us is a lot of the cross-analysis of data that we can do. Once we have the data about what students do what stuff, we also have the data about what students get what grades and the data about what students, engage in various kinds of RIT required activities like, doing your degree audit and stuff like that. We can start to look at things, that say, do students who do these kinds of achievements, are they more likely to also be successful in these other ways? And so there's some really fun stuff you can do when you're doing this within the context of, a given structure. But we need to know, what do they want to do? What motivates them? What will engage them? And we need them to tell us that too. The more we can involve the students in the development of content, the better that will be.
To that end, have you found that Bartle's player types is of use at all?
Yes. How is Bartle's player type ever not useful, right? But Nick Yee has actually done a much richer, more nuanced, interesting discussion of player types and underlying motivations, which is another thing that we're looking at. And if you email me, I will send you the link to that. It's a really, really nicely done thing, which doesn't reject Bartle, but says it's too simplistic, which in fact it is, because nobody fits into just one of those player categories, And what Nick has done is, rather than saying there's a player type, is to say there are these areas of motivation and then sub-areas of motivation within them. And that's a big part of the framework that we want to use in looking at individual activities and achievements, is how does it fit into that, and are we making sure that we hit a range of those? Because it's very easy to design the stuff that you want to play, right? And if you fall into one of these areas, it can be hard to recognize that that's not really going to be that interesting to somebody else, and this will. And so that's part of what we're working with, is yes, Bartle, but also what Nick Yee has done.
One of the things that you guys might want to do, we built this tool that at work that sort of bolted onto Outlook. We called it this thing called Salsa, but it was showed people's pictures and what they were doing. But one of the interesting things that we did, which you guys might want to do when we rolled it out, is we actually surveyed people before they used it. So you get a baseline. And I think that that's sometimes something that we forget to do, just because we build it and then we give it and then we start doing analysis. But we found one of the most interesting differences was before people used Salsa, they thought they would use it to look up information on their managerial hierarchy, and they thought looking at friends would be super low priority, and after a month of usage, that really evened out. And I would suspect similar things might happen, you might initially assume that people who were good might be good students, but you might find that this appeals to a different set of students, or people that, and just being able to kind of go back and measure that would be interesting, just to make sure you do before.
And that's some of what we've actually been talking with Wisconsin about, is, which of these things should we be measuring beforehand? What should we be asking? How should we ask it? Because that's the part that is harder for us to conceptualize, is what are the right questions for us to ask? So.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to respond to a couple of things, and I had a question for you as well. Just, a few things I heard Jonathan, talking about different groups and how they'd respond to it. And it is important, and obviously we'll refine these things. It's kind of funny to me, I was just talking to these guys earlier about how when talking about educational solutions, we're oftentimes put at this amazingly high standard where it's sort of like, if you're going to come up with a good solution, it should apply to everybody, it should work for every situation. And it strikes me as kind of ironic, considering that the educational system, if reality is broken, education is just like dust. It's so there's something like about 7,000 kids per day drop out of high school in this country. It's absolutely astounding once you start seeing the numbers. And if we can start making even small differences or improvements, I mean, I think that there's a tremendous justification. And that being said, it's trying to get to the root of what makes these things fun and differential. But yeah, you can look at it. Lily, as far as working with you guys, we'd love to. We've been actively doing outreach with different groups. There's DevDiv has some interesting projects going on. There's the Achievements Web Services, which is a framework that is being actively looked at. And I think there's a lot of things we can leverage. We're talking to Engineering Excellence. They're very interested in using these kinds of systems, dog fooding on our own people, looking at onboarding SDETs and putting them into these kinds of systems. I think it's totally fertile ground. We were talking, I mean, these guys are willing to do the sorts of high-risk kinds of activities that we maybe can't do when it's people's salaries on the line. Of course, it's just grades for you guys. You know?
And students don't really care very much about those.
The marriage here we see is that inside we can leverage these things, and we were talking about in the Outer Curve Foundation, maybe open sourcing a project, bringing in engineers who can really apply all of our corporate know-how to build hardened systems and allowing these guys to experiment on it, and I think that's really fruitful. So, we'll be talking on Monday. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's also just in what we've already looked at with this project and just the current curriculum and our students in general, there's a real danger in designing around last year's paradigm, because I do this thing with the freshmen every single year where we talk about their motivations and coming into the, I made a commitment that I would teach all the freshman seminars and the entire program because I wanted to understand my incoming students. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that when we scale up to 1,000 students in a couple of years, but I teach them in little sections of no more than 15 so that I can meet every single one of them. And I know I'm insane. But so I do this thing with them every year where I ask them, what are your motivations for getting into the program, and why do you want to do this at all? This seems like a crazy way to want to make a living, and so on and so forth. And invariably we get down to sort of what games did you play growing up, and what impact do you think they had on how you think about games and media, and all these other kinds of quality discussions that you have with media students. Last year, something interesting happened. Last year was the first year where I had a majority of students self-identify that they spent the bulk of their media experience entirely on a mobile platform. From the Game Boy Advance on up. I had about 20% of the freshmen that never owned a game console, and they're in a game design and development degree. That's very, very different from even the way we were thinking when we designed this program. The way the industry was thinking when they said, we want to hire people that have relevant media experience that looks like X. It's a huge shift in the worldview of somebody, in the way that they think about that type of content. And it's going to change again in very short order. And so, we have to be cognizant and designed to, the 18-year-olds of next year and 5 years and 10 years from now, and what that's going to try to look like. And I think that's one of the reasons for the dust is that we keep designing for the students of many, many moons ago.
Well, this is what we can do is we can design services that can supply a multiplicity of platforms and a really rich ecosystem of partners and let these things surface where they want to. And not just like a profile that shows the badges. For those who say don't want to use achievements, they can still benefit from it, because even if you don't have your achievement surface, there's systems that can use it for back-end intelligence and analytics to provide sort of customized experiences. And I want to ask you guys a question though. I'm curious what you guys think about the creepy treehouse. There's a danger here because we're trying to sort of make a game, we're trying to subtly guide people to do good things, and there's sort of this moral and ethical undertone to it, and how do we stay away from building this kind of creepy treehouse?
Does everybody know what the creepy treehouse is?
Is when adults build an experience for kids that's supposed to be really cool and really fun, and it's like a gingerbread house in the woods, and the kids are like, "Ooh, that's creepy," and they stay away from it. They instinctively know that
a grown-up made this.
So I know one thing with kids. Maybe less so in college, but in middle school especially, kids are really attracted to subversive elements.
Right.
They're looking at autonomy, and I'm wondering if you guys have considered the element of subversion and how that can fit into the larger game designs.
Yes, we have definitely considered it, and this is a big part of why we want to build a system that encourages and, eventually depends upon student creation of content. We don't think we should be the ones designing the achievements. We think they should be. But you have to at least have an initial architecture, right? You need to say, this is what a treehouse looks like. Now you build the treehouse. And if you will let us, we'd like to play in it too, because part of it is also that it's not us. We're judging them, so we want to play. They should create achievements for us, absolutely. I mean, they do it all the time, right? They test us constantly. They are so surprised when they see us in a bar, right? It's like, whoa, Well, you may not have been, but you should see the faces on some of my students when they,
Yeah.
It also depends on the bar, right? But we want them, to eventually take responsibility for this, that this should be theirs, that this should be their treehouse, that they build, that they look at, that they learn from, that we can learn from too, but not that we own.
Trails for the ones who come after them.
And in fact, you haven't seen our personas and scenarios document yet, but it has a big piece about alumni sort of going back and crafting content for the students, or students looking at what alumni have done. I mean, see?
Yeah.
Soa already wants to build quests, right?
I will fail them all.
Yeah, there's, our curriculum, the proper curriculum, not this, is very, very projects-based, right? And so I am invariably always accused of, well, you pick the project, so you lead the, what they're going to learn and all that kind of stuff. To 1,000%, the best learning experiences I have ever had in my classes are not when I say, we're going to build an X. It's when the students say, we want to build a Y, and we need your help to do it. Mm-hmm. Right? Those are the best learning experiences. And this is going to succeed on that paradigm. It's going to have to.
Yeah, I told Donald a story about what happened when we finished the design document for this, the one that's up on the website. I sent it out to our faculty so that they would know, what was going on with the project. And one person printed some copies out and had left them in a classroom. And a week later, I was walking down the hall and I walked past a lab with a whiteboard this big. Yep. And it was full of notes and diagrams, and this is actually not common. It's the IMM lab, and you don't generally see that board end to end covered with stuff. And there were like 4 students in there with one professor, and I was curious, so I opened the door, and as soon as I opened the door, the students turned and looked at me and said, "We want in." And I said, "You want into what?" I had no idea. They had found the vision document, and they had cornered a professor, and they had said, "We want to build content for this game." And they were sketching out what the freshman first week experience should be like in the game, completely unprompted, And this, to me, was so exciting, that without anybody asking them, they said, "We want to help build this. We want to make the treehouse. We don't just want to climb up in it." So, I suspect that we're going to get a lot of that as we start to go out, because people are going to look at this. I have yet to tell anybody about this project and have them say, "That sounds stupid." There's skepticism about whether it will work, but mostly there's that's really cool. Can we play too? Which is why we've got a law school involved and why we've got Wisconsin involved, because as soon as you tell people, they're like, "Can we be a part of this?" So we think that we'll be able to deal with it very much by inclusion rather than by saying, "Here's this nice prefabricated treehouse, for you to play in. Don't pay any attention to the cameras. Really, it's all fine." So
I've got a few work project documents. I'm just going to go leave around your department. Yeah. Maybe they'll just my work.
Good luck, Lee.
Speaking of cameras littered around, one of the things I guess I really liked and stood out for me was the badge that you had. And it was achievement-based badge. Mm-hmm. But I think, and maybe it's just older folks, having been working for 20 years, that, Myers-Briggs and some of these things that aren't achievement-based, but they're more experiential-based, mm-hmm. and who you are, and you start out with that baseline, and you know how you evolve, et cetera. It's kind of like, creating your character sheet. Do I want pointy ears, or do I want to be the average human, or do I want to be this really? And I think some of that kind of colors it as well. And so one of those things that I guess I think about when looking into this is some of those players are, those students are quite happy to be over in this zone. And they want to know other people that are like them.
Right.
So that, that whole badge design really appealed to me because I look for the people that are like me,
Yes.
and I look for the people that are different from me, that challenge
For
me
different
and push
reasons.
me out
Yep.
of that space. So
Exactly.
that was really nice.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's something that we're really excited about, the potential for how that can help people from a mentoring standpoint, from a finding people like me standpoint, and from a collaborating with people with different skills. I mean, there's lots that we can do with it. We got to get the metrics of it right. We've got to define those areas properly, but the potential, if we get that right, is huge.
No
So,
pressure.
I mean, people used to love putting I am an ENTP up
Right.
on their on their cube, right?
I had
Or
that.
here it's I am green, I am red, or
Right.
whatever yellow. I mean, and it's different with every but I mean that whole thing appeals to a certain percentage of the population, and the others feel that's creepy.
Right.
So.
Right. And a lot of this, that we're going to have to make it really easy for people to decide how much they want to disclose. It should not all be automatically public, and you should be able to choose. Can my friends see this? Can anybody see this? Do I want to put it on my Facebook page? I mean, what level of sharing this do you want? Chances are that, I'm going to make a different choice than Andy does in terms of how much of it I put out there. And we know this even just looking at ourselves, how different our sharing strategies are. So that's a big piece of what we need to work into this as we move forward is what do you share? How do you share it? How easy is it for you to control that access to things?
From a logistical standpoint, like I saw Simon was a developer on it, and are you trying to create like a platform that other schools can use?
Yes.
Or are you trying to just roll it out at RIT first and then kind of show people the way? Like, is there going to be APIs?
No, we want this is a platform that could be done in a couple of ways. So if we do end up with the resources to be able to roll this out to multiple places, our plan is to begin by hosting multiple instantiations of it locally, so that if we're dealing with New York Law School, they don't have to set up a server, install the software, figure out how to manage it, figure out how to do the APIs. Basically, we just set up the New York Law School instantiation, and it's Justin Schwartz, who's a new game design grad student who's working on it, has a significant software engineering background, and he's building a very flexible, extensible architecture so that this is not tied at all to RIT or RIT systems. It simply has the gateways to be able to bring the data in.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Andy and Liz, for coming out here and sharing this with us. And I encourage everybody who is interested, we are looking for collaborators. We're very interested in testing this on our own people and looking for people who can help us, give us ideas of technology we have that we can help them to leverage so they can make this experience as big and as exciting as they possibly can. And hopefully a lot more people than just us will be knowing about this very, very soon. So thanks.
All right.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.